This is Chapter 19, Foreseen Panic, Part 2, from a story called The Time-Dilated Generations, by Esteban Gallardo. Ellie wasn't exaggerating. Emma Anderson had written, with chilling precision, the downfall of every generational spaceship, not through acts of nature, not through cosmic indifference, but through the deliberate, inevitable failings of humanity itself. What made her stories even more disturbing was how accurate they were, down to the smallest detail. The apocalypses varied, but they all shared the same core truth. Humanity was always its own worst enemy. Some colonies collapsed under the weight of militarization. Military coups, fueled by political corruption or the fear of rising socialism, led to authoritarian regimes where nations sought absolute dominance over their world. Escalations turned into war. War turned into total annihilation. Weapons of mass destruction, developed in the name of security, ended up erasing all life. Other worlds fell to the arrogance of unchecked scientific ambition. Desperate for faster results, researchers abandoned ethical safeguards, pushing experimental technologies beyond their limits. One colony's fate was sealed when a high-energy fusion experiment literally tore the planet apart. Then there were the nightmares of genetic engineering. Governments and corporations, seeking to create the ultimate soldier, experimented with self-replicating nanobot-enhanced biology. The result was not an army of perfected warriors, but a self-sustaining predator, a force of engineered monstrosities that wiped out the very species that had created them. Each account was detailed with terrifying specificity. One by one, Emma had chronicled the extinction of every human colony. But two stories stood out, two scenarios that hit far too close to home. Emma herself acknowledged that this first story wasn't even original. It was a direct parallel to something that had almost actually happened on Earth. She based it on the real-world history of lead additives in fossil fuels, a crisis that had plagued Earth's 20th century. For nearly 100 years, lead had been used in gasoline, poisoning entire populations before the scientific community, after decades of struggle, finally forced industries to stop. It had been a slow war of evidence against corporate greed, but eventually the truth had won. Emma's version did not end so optimistically. In her story, an exoplanetary colony built its economy around a material as essential as lead had been to Earth's fossil fuel industry. This material, widely used in construction, agriculture, and even medicine, was unknowingly poisoning every living being on the planet. A single scientist, much like those who had fought against lead poisoning on Earth, discovered the horrifying truth. But unlike in real history, this time there was no redemption. The scientist was silenced. Before he could publish his findings, before he could warn the world, he disappeared. His research was erased, buried under layers of corporate propaganda. By the time the truth became undeniable, it was too late. Generations had been exposed. The damage was irreversible. The planet's entire population, unknowingly poisoned, dwindled into extinction. And as the readers absorbed Emma's words, they realized this was not just a hypothetical scenario. They had probably just lived this story. The tragedy of Rigel 1 had unfolded in a chillingly familiar manner. The insidious accumulation of a toxic element, xalthane, had sealed the colony's fate. Unbeknownst to those within the time-dilated network, someone had discovered the massive poisoning decades before the first fatalities occurred, only to be silenced. The second story was even worse. Emma described a world eerily similar to Negus, a beautiful, thriving planet where capitalism had followed its natural trajectory into the most extreme form. A world where wealth had consolidated into the hands of the elite, where the working class had been reduced to a permanent underclass with no future, no hope. The perfect conditions to create high-functioning, desperate individuals. Emma's version wasn't about a viral bioweapon. Instead, it was about information. A single piece of knowledge distributed freely across the planet's digital networks. It was a detailed step-by-step guide on how to construct incredibly small, incredibly powerful nuclear devices. A knowledge bomb. In her story, the moment that information became available, the countdown to extinction had already begun. With billions of people driven to despair, it only took a handful of them, just a few thousand, to set off a chain reaction. Within months, nuclear detonations became an unstoppable cascade, launched not by nations, but by individuals. The elite had fortified themselves in underground bunkers, but it didn't matter. The nuclear winter that followed suffocated the entire planet, wiping out the last remnants of human life. Emma's nightmare had unfolded in an eerily similar manner to Negus's own destruction. Only instead of nuclear weapons, the desperate masses of Negus had created something worse. A virus engineered from the shadows, designed to erase the very system that had oppressed them by killing everyone. The more they read, the worse it became. Emma Anderson's stories were not just fiction, they were prophecies. Not because she had supernatural foresight, but because she understood a brutal truth about humanity. Left unchecked, the same cycles would repeat, over and over, until there was nothing left. For the leaders of the generational fleet, the implications were horrifying. They had spent over 4 centuries drifting through space, believing that they had finally broken free from Earth's doomed fate. They had thought that with careful planning, with controlled governance, with the unity of a species on the brink of extinction, they could forge a better future. But now, doubt crept into their minds. Had they truly escaped Earth's fate, or had they merely delayed it? Emma Anderson had foreseen the failure of every generational ship, and so far, 2 of them had met their demise in a manner strikingly similar to her predictions. That meant the others were still waiting for their turn, waiting for their apocalypse. That was Chapter 19, Foreseen Panic, Part 2, from a story called The Time-Dilated Generations, by Esteban Gallardo. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.